Okay, hi everyone, welcome. This is the Research and Data Symposium for Food and Nutrition 2021. And this session is a career panel where we'll be talking about careers in food business and innovation. So a few quick logistics before we start the session. We are recording this session, so if you don't want to be part of the recording, please keep your camera off and keep your microphone muted. And you can also change your name in the participants list if you'd rather that not get recorded. So please also keep your microphones muted throughout the session unless you're called on to ask a question during the Q&A. And you can enter questions in the chat box anytime or comments that you have for our panelists. And finally, I've pinned all of our panelists in the speaker view. So I suggest you go to the top right corner of your screen and select speaker view so you'll see them throughout the talk. So our moderator for today will be Melissa Palmer, the Director of Career Services at the Friedman School. So take it away, Melissa.
Great, thank you. As Alana said, my name is Melissa Palmer, and I'm the new Director of Career Services here for our brand new Block Career Center at the Friedman School. And so excited to be here and moderating this panel. I think as we plan out our career steps, just having good career information is so helpful. So we're focused today on careers in food business and innovation. And our panel today is made up of Dr. Rachel Cheatham, founder and CEO of Foodscape Group. We have Carla Curle, account executive for Food Minds, Rav Deep Jaidka, who's vice president and sourcing manager of the Equal Exchange producer, and Kate Schaffner, manager of global sustainability for Kellogg. So with that, I'd like to invite each of our panelists to give a short introduction of themselves and the current work that they're doing. And let's start with Rachel, if we could, and then we'll go in the order I introduced you.
Great, thanks, Melissa. So I'm Dr. Rachel Cheatham. I'm based in Chicago, Illinois. And my basic background, the way I like to describe myself, is very split brain. On one hand, I'm a former commercial television producer working in advertising. I'm a former senior vice president at a global PR firm, working with a lot of the big food and beverage and dietary supplement companies around the globe. And then on the other side of my brain, I'm a trained scientist, thanks to Friedman. I did my PhD in the energy metabolism lab back at Tufts. And so now in the work I do, running a consultancy Foodscape Group, we work with brands of all sizes, both pre-market and global billion-dollar companies, advising them on how to integrate nutrition into their strategy of product and innovation.
Fantastic. Carla.
Great. Thanks, Melissa. Hi, everyone. I'm Carla. I am based in Berkeley, California, and I'm an account executive at Food Minds, and we are a company that is focused on navigating science, public affairs, consumer values, and communication to help create innovative strategies and help our clients meet business, public health, and sustainability objectives. So we work across the board with a lot of different CPG companies of various sizes. We also work with some food tech companies, as well as commodity board groups. And we have about 30 employees on staff, including 15 registered dietitians, public health experts, and sustainability experts, along with a global network of food nutrition affairs experts. And I've been at Food Minds about 2.5 years. And I'm excited to share a little bit more about the work that we do.
Great. Ravdeep and then Kate.
Great. Thank you, Melissa. Great to be here. It feels like a little reunion. Good to see you, Kate and Carla as well, and Elena. So I'm Rav Deep. I'm based in Boston. I'm the Vice President and Sourcing Manager in the Produce Division at Equal Exchange. Equal Exchange is a fair trade and organic importer trading directly with small farmer cooperatives from over 20 countries. So Equal Exchange started 35 years ago in coffee. We were the first company in the US to trade on fair trade terms. Obviously, since then, fair trade has expanded a lot, and so has Equal. We now work in several other products, including chocolate, tea, nuts, and bananas and avocados. So I work in the produce division, focused on our banana program from Ecuador and Peru, and our avocado program from Mexico and Peru. So essentially, the work is managing weekly imports of the products. So we are in communication with the farmer cooperatives. We manage the logistics of the entire supply chain, as well as sales to distributor partners in the US. So I'll leave it at that for now and looking forward to chatting more.
Great. Kate, do you want to jump in?
I agree with Ravdeep. It's so nice to see everyone. And great to be speaking with the full team today. So my name is Paige Hoffman. I sit on the global sustainability team for the Kellogg Company, which is an over 100-year-old cereal and snack company. We source ingredients from all over the world, and we are a very well-known brand and held to high standards with respect to the corporate responsibility principles that we set for ourselves, as well as the sustainability of our ingredient sourcing. And my role on our global sustainability team is to set strategies and priorities for how we responsibly source priorities.
I'm not sure if it's just me, but Kate, we're having trouble hearing you.
Yeah, I'm hearing some background noise too. Maybe if everyone could go on mute, if they aren't already, and we can try again. Okay, it's cleared up for me. Melissa, is that better for you? Okay, I'm seeing nods, thumbs up, great. Let's try again. Such is the joy of Zoom. So, as I was saying, I sit on our global sustainability team. I help to set strategies and priorities for how we responsibly source our ingredients, how we share our progress and our sourcing policies with customers, consumers, investors, and how we build programs to support the resilience of farmers in our supply chains with a focus on climate, biodiversity, and farmer livelihoods. We have over 40 projects all over the world where we invest in supporting farmers and adopting practices that will enable their resilience over the short and long term. And we do this in partnership with suppliers, research institutions, NGOs, agronomists, a wide array of partners all over the world. And happy to talk a little bit more about how that work looks in case there are others who are considering this career path for themselves in the future.
Perfect. That actually leads Kate into my first question, which is, give us an example of a current project that you're working on. And could you also then speak to what are some of the challenges that you're facing either in your role or in your industry as it relates to the future of the field? So kind of a two-part question there, but Kate, do you want to start us off with that?
Sure. And I know there are people joining this conversation from several countries around the world. And as I mentioned earlier, we have programs all over the world, but I'll start with work that we're doing in the US and happy to share more examples if anyone has questions. So in 2019, we partnered with the Nature Conservancy to launch what we've called our Supporting US Farmers collaboration, where Kellogg is partnering with the Nature Conservancy to provide funds, technical assistance, partnership, peer networks to farmers in locations where Kellogg sources ingredients. So this takes place across states, Michigan, Illinois, Nebraska, and Arkansas, and covers the production of corn, wheat, harvest, you can imagine, corn flakes, Rice Krispies, etc. It's been a really wonderful journey over the last 2.5 years, almost, getting ready to round out our last year, take a step back, appreciate the successes, learn from the things that were challenging, and then translate that into future work with farmers. I would say what's been really wonderful about that work is that it's allowed us to partner across a broader region with a trusted partner for us and for farmers, and to customize some of the practical solutions that we support with those farmers. So for example, in Arkansas, the program itself is really simple. All Kellogg is doing is covering the cost of installing pump timers for irrigation pumps. Rice is a big deal because it's flood irrigated in that part of the world. So if you can change how you manage when you irrigate, you can save a lot of water, which again, very important for that part of the world, especially for a groundwater aquifer. In other parts, we're looking at more complex challenges and opportunities. Maybe it's intercropping cover crops into a standing corn crop so that you can get all the benefits of having a cover crop from a soil health perspective and also support crop diversity during your cash crop season. Maybe it's adopting no-till strategies, again, to reduce soil erosion, improve soil health, etc. So it's been really great because it's allowed us to get a little bit more tailored about how we work with farmers. It's challenging because those tailoring opportunities also create complexity. So that's something that's worth considering across multiple projects. It also speaks to being a challenge across all of the industry, which is that Kellogg and others are trying to do what we can to invest, to de-risk adopting some of these practices with farmers, but there's always some upfront costs. Even practices that can improve farmers' profitability over the 3 to 5 year range can be risky in year one. And that's always a challenge that is important to address and try to overcome in programs like this. It also speaks to the reality that most of these practices are not mainstream practices yet, and that's a systems challenge. It's not just about what corporate supply chains can support, it's also about what public policies can enable. What can voluntary conservation programs through NRCS, for example, continue to enable? How can we better connect this with climate outcomes? How can we reduce administrative burden for farmers? These are things that all affect how we build programs and how we continue to improve the role that we play as a supply chain partner in advancing better practice and being a better partner to farmers at the end of the day.
Great, thank you for that. Rachel or Carla, do you want to chime in and share a bit about any current projects that you're working on and what some of the challenges are in your area?
Do you want to go
Rachel.
first, Carla? Go ahead.
Okay. Yeah, I'd be happy to share some. So my work really varies day to day and week to week. As a consultant, we work with a variety of clients, but I'll just give a snapshot of a couple of projects that I'm currently working on and one that I recently wrapped up. So one kind of priority for a lot of our clients right now is engaging and planning for the UN Food System Summit that's happening in September of this year. There's a lot of action in 2021 around sustainable food systems and global nutrition. So one thing that we're helping a lot of our clients navigate and engage on is just getting involved in the lead up to the UN Food System Summit happening in September. That will most likely be a hybrid model given the pandemic, both hopefully partially in person, but mostly virtual. So I'm helping to convene an independent dialogue on behalf of a client that brings together experts both in the sustainability space, nutrition space, brings academics and members of the public together to really bolster conversations and kind of expand thinking around various food systems topics. Another project I recently wrapped up for a client that was completely different and not really related to sustainability was a food safety audit, looking at different country-specific regulations and guidance around food safety, both in food service locations to help inform a strategy for a client looking to expand licensing agreements with restaurants in various parts of the world. So that was super interesting. I learned a lot about regulations in the Middle East, regulations in Southeast Asia, and really helping inform their strategy and plan for that. So I guess long story short, my weeks never look the same, and it's constantly a learning curve. Always an exciting thing to get pulled into a new client project. But I typically work with between 4 and 5 clients at a time. And yeah, it's never a dull moment.
Fantastic. Rachel, do you want to jump in, and then Ravdeep?
Sure. I think as a consultant and entrepreneur, I think for me, I find a lot of my time is spent on essentially creating a point of view for a client. So I may end up presenting that virtually. It may be slides, it may be a short report, it may be a long report, it may be, 80-page report with a few hundred scientific references. What we do in our work is try to combine 4 main areas that include science. That's kind of like my home base. I'm a trained scientist. Science, policy, consumer, and the marketplace. So consumer is more the behaviors of our consumers. Marketplace is more what products already exist, what's the competitive set, where's the white space, what's going on. So we try to combine those 4 areas, science, policy, consumer, and marketplace, in the point of view that we craft for a client. So some of the things I'm working on now more specifically, we're helping our clients understand the new dietary guidelines for Americans that came out just within the past 2 months. We help them understand first, like, what are they? What do they mean if the client isn't as well versed in them? Some of our clients know them intimately, some barely know they exist. So we try to educate them on what do the guidelines say, and then maybe even look at what other countries' guidelines say to help do some comparing and contrasting, and then place that into context for them in terms of their current existing portfolio of products and or services, and where could or should they go with that portfolio if we look ahead 3 years, 5 years, 10 years. So I think the biggest sort of win, if you will, for me personally as a consultant, running a small business, being an entrepreneur, the biggest win for me personally is if we are able to work with clients that bring in this kind of thinking early on in the process, and that you can actually see changes over time. And my favorite clients, and I'm fortunate to have some I've worked with since the beginning. I started Foodscape in 2013, where we're asked to come in maybe semi-annually, quarterly, and we help with innovation sessions, bring a point of view, bring some context to what's going on in the nutrition, health, and well-being space. And I think that's maybe one of the things that I didn't know when I first became a consultant that I found to be quite true, which is you can be working with a big company, a small company, a quote traditional company, a highly progressive, all backed by Silicon Valley company. Like, you can be any and all of the above. Many times the senior leadership team, they simply need and or want, quote, outside input. They want somebody who is under NDA, under a non-disclosure agreement. You can't spill their deep secrets. It's all held in confidence, but you're able to say, I'm coming in from the outside. Here's what I'm seeing. Let me just present that point of view. You can agree or disagree. That's fine. I'm more than happy to have some healthy debate, but let's look at a perspective and think about maybe where some of your blind spots are. And that, to me, is what keeps consulting both interesting and keeps me, in business, having a paycheck, is that kind of insight can be really useful to really companies and brands of almost any size.
Thanks, Rachel. So my role is twofold as the vice president and the sourcing manager. So a recent project that I just wrapped up as the vice president was our annual budget process, which generally happens around November and December. So doing a lot of forecasting with our sales team to understand what the sales were going to be for the bananas and avocados over this coming year. And then the work over the year is meeting that budget, obviously, and all of the other financial indicators. I'll talk more about the sourcing role. I think that might be more interesting for this group. So in my sourcing manager role, over the last several years, there's been a lot of work done to onboard new groups. So when I started in 2015 at Equal Exchange, we were working in the produce division with 4 producer groups, and today we're working with 9. So it's more than doubled. So I've helped vet and onboard the majority of these groups. And I think this year we're in a stable space with our supply. We have a diversified supply to meet the supply growth, and the focus for me this year is sort of systematizing the work a little bit, which maybe is a little bit boring compared to just bringing on a new group or starting a new program, but still important. So the focus for me this year is developing a set of metrics to evaluate new and existing suppliers. So essentially a producer scorecard, I think is a common term in the industry. So we actually worked with a group of students from Friedman who did some initial research for us to figure out what kind of scorecards other companies are using, and help develop a draft for us. And we are measuring 4 different categories. So they're social, environmental, economic, and governance. Most commonly, social, economic, and environmental exist in all scorecards. Governance is a piece that we added on because it felt more specific to the work that we do at Equal Exchange, which is working more directly with small farmer cooperatives. So right now we sort of have a draft of these, of the scorecard, and we have, metrics and indicators in each category, and the work now is simplifying it. But the challenge really is you want it simple enough that it's not so cumbersome to do, but complicated enough that it means something. So that's a fine balance. And, the programs are also so different. The way bananas are grown in Ecuador is totally different from the way bananas are grown in Peru. So the sustainability efforts a co-op is doing in Peru, that may be water conservation, whereas in Ecuador, it may be a bit different and focused on soil health. So how do we cater these metrics so they're not penalizing groups for having a different focus in their efforts, but making sure it's meeting the groups where they are and taking into account their geographic location and the different socioeconomic indicators of that commodity in that country. So it's a challenge, but I think it will be good to just kind of take a step back and systematize some of the work that we have done in the past several years with onboarding new groups.
Wow, you all are doing such fascinating work. I'm curious if you could talk a little bit about how you've navigated your career path. How did you get the role that you currently have? I would imagine there are some people listening in today who would love to have a job similar to the one that you're in right now, and just would love for you to speak to how you've gotten there. And anyone can jump in. But don't all talk at once.
I'll start. There's a short answer to that, and there's a long answer to that. But the short answer, I think, is, for me, it was very zigzag approach to eventually starting my own business. And by that, I mean, I first was a commercial TV producer, then I became the scientist, then I went into PR, then I started my own consulting firm. And I think that the secret sauce for me was taking more technical skills, like basically being a scientist, a trained scientist, and applying those in a different arena. In this case, my different arena was in public relations. It doesn't mean you have to, go from science to PR. It's more this idea that sometimes the skills you're building in a field like nutrition and the degrees that you're getting specifically in the field, they can be applied in a broad number of ways that aren't always like immediately obvious. We're not all training to become medical doctors where the path is more clear cut. Of course, many MDs kind of run on a different path now too. But I think the biggest thing for me that I had to realize is the more I could crisscross back and forth in different quote, fields, I actually found I got more traction as far as like job opportunities, people interested in talking with me to consider hiring me for something or other by crisscrossing areas that normally weren't being crisscrossed. The one sort of, watch out piece of that is that it can be a little difficult. You can be told, what are you doing? You're a trained scientist. You should be in the lab doing real science. Like PR, you've like gone to the dark side. And so I was told that, so not by all, but by some. So I had to like really learn if I were to say, if you have interest in diverse areas and or a quote non-traditional career path, I think you have to maybe be ready to hear some commentary about your chosen path that won't always be favorable. It doesn't mean it's not right, it's right for you. And the ways that your path will maybe come together aren't inherently obvious at all points along the way, because you're not taking a real like straight line, clear cut route. So for me, it's that kind of whole zigzag thing and having some internal confidence that I'm interested in this. It may not make sense on paper traditionally, but I'm going to keep going forward. There's something here. I'm going to just forge ahead.
I can jump in. I would echo a lot of what Rachel said in terms of the zigzag nature. And I graduated with a degree in environmental science and was a little bit separated from like the food world in my early 20s, and decided to go back to school and entered the agriculture, food and environment program, and just loved it. And really had a focus at that point on jumping into nonprofit work. And I did work at a small nonprofit in DC after graduating in 2016. And through that experience, I learned a lot just about, work on the Hill in DC and ways to engage in policy, like from the small nonprofit and advocacy approach, but was really curious about kind of the private side. And through searching and actually moving back to California, I found this job at Food Mines, which kind of didn't go the full way in terms of jumping into the private sector, but is kind of the intermediary as a consultant. And I found the job actually on a Facebook food job board and reached out to the woman who posted it, and she shared a bit more about Food Mines, and it seemed super interesting, kind of a convergence of a lot of the things I care about: food, sustainability, social justice, and kind of bringing all of these topics together to help clients grow their business, but also keep public health and sustainability at the forefront. So just kind of searching around and talking to people was really how I have navigated the path since graduating. And I would urge everyone to use LinkedIn as much as you can, reach out, especially right now with virtual meetings and just informational interviews as a really great way to learn about people's career paths. And yeah, that's how I've landed where I'm at.
I'll go next. And both of your stories resonate with my own experience of not having a linear career path. And occasionally getting friendly, but maybe not so friendly at the time feedback along the lines like, oh, you want to go back to school and you want to study what? Couldn't you just go to law school? Wouldn't that make more sense? You'd have job security afterward. And I suppose what I'd want to share with this group is that even if you're looking at career opportunities in industry, and there are lots of different ways to make that happen. There's not just the one path, which can be daunting at first, but encouraging as you start to move through and figure out what kinds of roles and daily responsibilities fit best for you. There's an entire ecosystem around advancing sustainability and resilience through corporate action, whether we're talking about supply chain management or philanthropic investment or consulting companies and how to build strategies through that, or partnering them with them to deliver programs, either from an implementation perspective or a design perspective. So I would say that even if you want to be in industry, there are so many ways to do work that informs that kind of industry action that open up more opportunities than I think I realized I had when I was a student at Friedman. So taking a step back, my original academic training is in molecular cell and developmental biology, which I swear I still use now, but there were a few years where I didn't. I spent a few years in the Bay Area in California working on community-focused food systems work. I was an AmeriCorps member. I worked with small nonprofit organizations around food policy. I worked with small food and farming businesses and knew that I wanted to work on something that was locally relevant, but spoke to the systemic factors that create the food systems that we rely upon today. And that's a policy question. So I went to the Friedman School. I got a really valuable education out of that. And that's true generally speaking, but even specific to job searching, I submitted a science brief that I wrote as part of the Ag Science and Policy series at Friedman when I applied to my job at WWF, the World Wildlife Fund, which I worked at for several years in DC. And it was part of what helped me secure that role because I could demonstrate that I had the science literacy to interpret peer-reviewed literature appropriately and make grounded policy recommendations, which is not something that everyone in the space can offer. So with that said, went to Friedman, interned at Ceres for a year. They do really great work around advocacy for corporate action and sustainability, and then went to WWF, was in DC for 3 years, and moved to Kellogg in 2018. Doing similar work, but sitting in different seats around the table. And I think each seat, each stakeholder perspective and how to make supply chains more resilient plays its role, and having the opportunity to move into different seats gives you a bit more of a sense of what can drive decision-making and what complexities are necessary to navigate through in order to build something sustainable.
Okay, yeah, very similar. I think that's probably true for a lot of folks in terms of not having a very linear trajectory. I studied global health and nutrition in college and was pre-med and like took my MCATs, which seems crazy right now. But after college, I worked in the nutrition field, and at that point got interested more in the production and the ag side, and decided that coming to school at Friedman within the AFE program was a good way to learn more about that industry and that discipline, and figure out a career path from there. So I came to AFE. I knew I wanted to work in the private sector. I had worked in the nonprofit sector previously and didn't think it was the right fit for me. I was not interested as much in the public sector, so that helped me narrow things down earlier. And, so it was essentially a process of elimination, but I did end up, wanting to go into the private sector. And then within the AFE degree, I think the summer internship was a great opportunity to try that out. I had my summer internship doing a sustainability position at MIT. And while MIT is not a food business, obviously, I wanted to learn more about the sustainability sector as a whole, because often, for AFE students and maybe generally Friedman students, when you think of the private sector, sustainability is always the first fit that you think of. So I came out of that experience, super interested, working to continue working in the sustainability sector, but those jobs are also hard to come by. So just leaving the door open to a lot of things. And then I did what every second year student does, which is, have informational calls with just about everybody you can, got some great advice that got me thinking, and applied to all the jobs that seemed like a good fit. And then from there, it's just a matter of timing, and a position opened up at Equal Exchange while I was looking for a job. I started off as a supply chain coordinator, so working more on logistics for our banana imports, so working more in operations and supply chain, and not necessarily sustainability. And since then, moved into the sourcing role, and then last year stepped into the vice president and continuing the sourcing manager role. So I'm really glad, I left the door open to a lot of opportunities, and operations has been super fun, and supply chain work has been super fun. And I think it's also just been a matter of timing. I ended up joining my company at a time when it was growing a lot, and that has just offered me the opportunity to continue to grow and develop. So I've been here longer than I thought I would when I first took the job, but here I am.
Fantastic. So I'm curious to know, what experiences or skills have you found to be the most helpful in terms of helping you to advance your career so far? Are there any classes or experiences that you had at the Friedman School or other things outside of the university that have prepared you best for your current job? And while we're discussing this question, feel free to put into the chat any questions that you all may have for our panelists, and I'll pull those off and weave them into our conversation.
I can start. I mentioned earlier that I referenced coursework that I completed in the Agriculture, Food, and Environment program at Friedman when I was applying to jobs that focused heavily on conservation agriculture. So there was an immediate applicability to the work that I was doing, to the jobs that I was pursuing, which was really satisfying, because at the time I was not always confident that I was going to be able to find the next step. For what it's worth, there is hope. There are many next steps. I would say generally, not just about the Friedman School, opportunities, if you're going to go into agricultural sustainability, to improve or build upon your policy expertise with respect to the policies that inform how farmers make decisions, as well as a good foundation in agricultural science, agronomy, things like this, so that you can speak with a baseline level of understanding and confidence about what it takes to be a farmer. If you have your own experiences as a farmer, that helps too. I think that's been essential for how I've worked through my career path so far. I would also say that solid communication skills, particularly writing and good science writing, so that it's accessible to multiple audiences, is very transferable and very valuable, and not as common in the job marketplace as you might expect. So any opportunity to test those skills and them is valuable. I have found very valuable, and specifically to Friedman programming, really appreciated that there were so many opportunities to write and make sure that I was coming out of that program a stronger communicator.
Yeah, I would really second what Kate is saying. Seemingly science communication, particularly nutrition science communication, is a real skill that, curiously, a lot of people in roles you would think would have that skill don't necessarily fully have that skill developed. So there's really opportunity for individuals who can do that well and do it creatively. And to Kate's point, understanding, in my own words, Kate's point, I'll just say it in my own words, like, you got to know your audience. I had a real wake up call years ago before I started Foodscape, and I was working at the big PR firm, working with, this was years ago, so if this means nothing to some of you younger ones, but I was working with H1N1, AKA swine flu, these kinds of things. And I remember the head of our group at that point was like, well, Rachel, you get this H1N1 stuff. Can you make some tweets about it so that our client can tweet about this? And I remember marching back to my desk thinking like, oh, wow, how do you put H1N1 in a tweet? And this was back when Twitter had its 150 character limit. And so it was that real eye opener to me as this highly trained scientist, now out in the real world, that you can know, in my case, and others that are more in the science side of this, you can know as much of the science as a human can know. In my experience, if you cannot articulate that in ways that your listener, viewer, audience, client, whomever, if you can't articulate that in ways that they really get, it's not really going to go anywhere. And that's kind of the crux of why I left academia. I really thought I loved being in the energy metabolism lab back at Tufts. I did my whole thesis on food and mood and caloric restriction. And I just thought it was the coolest topic ever. And I'm so grateful to the lab, Sue Roberts and the team giving me the opportunity. Having said that, somewhere along the line, I kind of realized for me personally, I wanted to take my training and my knowledge and like go out of academia and apply it in some way. And so I don't know that there's any one class I would necessarily say, if anything, and this probably won't be met with big smiles. It'll be like, oh, really? But I mean, if there's any class that I think I really lean on heavily beyond like all the chemistry I had to take, honestly, it's statistics. And I kind of sort of hated statistics at the time. And I had to take 2 semesters and I had to do all my own SAS programming on my PhD. And I was like, not happy about any of that. And yet here I am years later, the ability to be able to pull a study out of peer review, read the study, understand what they studied and how they measured it and what the unit of analysis was or wasn't, and the control group and the epi this and the randomized control trial that, like, to be able to understand that and then think like, so the headline about this study, does the headline make sense, or like, where's the disconnect? And that simple, seemingly simple skill, if you've slaved your way through the training, the rigorous training that all Friedman graduates get, if you can take that and understand how to not just like, quote, translate the science, I hear that a lot, that's true, but to go to like the original research, read it, comprehend it, and really break it apart. Like where are the strengths, where are the weaknesses, like do all that analytical type thinking, then let's think about communicating. A lot of times I think the communication is like immediate and not always done by a team that maybe has the necessary analytical skills to go back to the original research. So that's a little bit of a rant because sometimes I get frustrated with how science gets written up out in the real world, but it's the absolute opportunity area. Like if you can find your spot in that continuum of deep science to communications over to end consumer through policy and whatever, there's tons of opportunity there because there's just such a need, I think, at least from my vantage point, there's a real need for that.
I love that. And Ravdeep and Carla, you can chime in on that same question. And or the other question I wanted to throw out to you guys is, if you could give advice, career advice to your younger self, what would it be? What do you know now that you wish you had known then?
I'll jump in and I'll just briefly touch on the previous question. I would echo everything that Kate and Rachel said, and really, I also used quite a few like writing samples from coursework at Friedman in applying to jobs afterwards. So save all of it, keep it. It's definitely going to come in handy at some point. I would also encourage students, if you still have time, to take courses either at Fletcher or through the UEP department, like really take advantage of the cross-sector and interdisciplinary collaboration opportunity while you're there, not only for coursework, but just for learning from like other sectors and students in those divisions. Really, really useful for building your network. I took a course at Fletcher, and then I took one at UEP in my final semester, actually on negotiation. So it was a little bit, at the time I was like, how is this going to help me in my career? But we learned all about salary negotiation and how to negotiate different conflicts, and honestly like played out different scenarios of how that would work from different points of view and different perspectives, which was super helpful. And in the workplace, it has come in handy quite a bit. And then in terms of what I would tell my younger self, I had a lot of anxiety and stress upon graduation, as I'm sure most people do. I would just try and tell myself to not worry about it. Like, even if you don't get the exact role or exact job you want right upon graduation, like there will be other opportunities, and you really can use every like step along the way to guide your progress and learn from it. I've learned a lot even from job rejections. Like that is part of the process, and you take something away from it, and really grow as a person, in your professional life too.
I can jump in here. Thanks, Carla. I was going to echo what Carla said. I took a lot of coursework at Fletcher. I think there was or is a corporate finance class that was great. And any work in data analysis, any work in Excel, I have used a lot. So that is a really good skill. And then I'll also add that it's really like a forever process in terms of continuing to gain skills. I've continued to have certifications in project management or taken management training. So, I think it's not just, getting skills in grad school and then sort of letting it go after that. There's a lot of opportunities to continue to build your skills once you get where you are and you figure out where you need to go as well. In terms of advice, I think, or what I wish I knew, I think obviously I put a lot of emphasis on, the title, the position, the compensation. And those are things that are important, but day to day, what dictates job satisfaction is so much more. It's what is your relationship with your manager? That can have a huge influence on whether you like your job or not. What is your relationship with your colleagues? What's the culture? Is it a small company where I can take on more responsibilities? Do I want a bigger company where my impact is greater? Is this company's sales growing? Are their sales contracting? All of those things are important. Obviously, salary, title are critical, but I think not diminishing or dismissing those other tangible or non-tangible factors is really important. And the interview is a really good opportunity to ask those questions and get to know those other aspects of the job, which will really impact your day-to-day and your job satisfaction. I think it's a little tricky with COVID, I think, with not being able to do perhaps interviews in person, but I think there's still opportunity to ask the right questions and get to know the company a little bit to just help with some job satisfaction beyond just title and compensation.
Yes. So in addition to wishing that I could give myself an emotional reprieve 5 or 6 years ago, because it was really
Oh no, I think we lost her.
We lost her. I can jump in. Maybe I'm sure she'll Kate will log back on. So I think Carla said something I would just follow on that I thought was really important. This idea of like, are there failures along the way? I think if I were to sort of look back and give myself advice or others listening, is in as much as humanly possible, try not to take what, for whatever reason, you've labeled a failure, like try not to take it too personally. And maybe there's even an insight in there kind of behind it as to why that whatever's happening is like this failure right now. And I think a quick example, I was at one point in my career before starting my own company, I was interviewing for different roles within food companies that certainly, to Rav Deep's point, they had, like the title, they had the salary, and, they seemingly were coveted roles. And I was fortunate enough to be, flown in and do all the interviews and all this stuff. And this is after I'd had a few other jobs under my belt. And I think that none of those worked out. And I remember feeling like I wasn't made an offer on any of them. And I remember thinking like, wow, I really I'm doing something not right here. I think I'm failing because these jobs aren't coming through. And in hindsight, if I think about the feedback I was getting, it became the insight I needed to start my own thing. The feedback I was being given, and this is like my interpretation, paraphrasing the feedback, is something to the effect of, we think you're great. You've got great training. You're well-spoken, all this stuff, but we don't quite know where to put you. We don't know if you are a scientist on the, the research and development team, or maybe you're like a nutritionist on the global nutrition team, or maybe you're like a communications person and we should put you in corporate communications. Like they literally didn't know where to stick me. And I remember feeling like really bad about that. Like I took it kind of personally, like, wow, I'm not stickable anywhere. What have I done wrong? And then I kind of somewhere along the line woke up and realized, hold on, this is like the opportunity. I can go stick myself where I want to be based on the business I'm going to go start by being this kind of cross-trained, kind of seemingly all over the map. How does this come together? It became the insight and the drive that allowed me to start Foodscape. It took me a few years to kind of put it all together, get my head wrapped around it, make some plans, build up some savings, whatever needs to happen. So I don't think you necessarily need to like start your own business out of the gate so that you can do, the thing that you best do. If anything, I would say go work for the other firms first and learn from them. But I think there's a lot to be said for figuring out these things that we label failures. Like, really, does it need to be pass fail? Just more like what's behind it? What's actually going on? Is there meaning to it that you could take away and apply to things coming down the way in the future?
Yeah, that's powerful advice, Rachel. And Kate, we have you back now. What do you wish you had known when you were starting out?
Well, first, I wish I would have known that job searches happen in the real world, and sometimes in the real world, there are technical failures that you can't control, and you can only do what you can. So thank you, everyone, for your patience with my technical failure today. And that's the most that you can do in situations like that. I worried probably more than I needed to about showing up to conversations about my professional future and being perfect, buttoned up, knowing exactly where I wanted to go. And the reality is that if you foresee a role for yourself that doesn't exist in the marketplace quite yet, or you see a long-term systemic need that you want to help address, you won't know all of the answers yet. And you're still learning more about what you need professionally too, what kind of culture you want, what a good boss means to you, what a good team means to you. So I wish I could have said to myself that it is not only okay not to know all of the answers and to have moments of human imperfection as you try to show up for those moments, but that's where everyone is. And what distinguishes you is how you respond to that uncertainty and the self-assuredness that you can bring to that and the willingness to learn that you can bring to that.
That's awesome. So what advice would you all have if we had someone in the audience whose goal was to work in your organization or one like yours, or in a position similar to yours? What advice would you have for them? And anyone can jump in.
I'll jump in. I think it's been said, but I would just simply take the opportunity to reiterate it. Really develop your communication skills. Develop your ability to engage with complete strangers on what your interests are and why you're taking interest in their business and how you're hoping to contribute in ways that are authentic to you. It doesn't need to be on brand. You don't need to say you're interested in the 3 things that they list in their mission statement. It needs to have a very humanized element to it. And I think being able to do that confidently, but not overconfidently, not in a boastful way, is really, it is a skill, and it takes some practice. And I think the more you do it, it becomes at least more natural. It doesn't feel so awkward or forced or, like you're just sort of angling to get a job, which you may be, but you don't need to come off that way. It's good to show genuine interest, because there's one thing that I can consistently say about Friedman students and grads. I've taught for Friedman online now for a decade. I teach in the certificate courses, I teach food marketing. One thing I can confidently say about Friedman is the students current, future, past, are legitimately curious, inquisitive types. And use that to your advantage. Like, you don't need to know everything. None of us know everything. We know we can come to grips with that. We don't. But if you can ask intelligent questions, that can be as impressive to someone who maybe will one day want to hire you as answering those questions straight out of the gate. If you can ask intelligent questions, you may find some doors opening in places and ways you didn't see coming.
Yeah, such fantastic advice. In the first panel, one of the themes from earlier today, one of the themes that came out really strongly was the power of networking and being able to talk to people about your interests and learn about them as well is really important. Carla, were you going to add something to that?
Yeah, well, I was just thinking that I would give the advice, if anyone out there is interested in a role similar to mine, to keep reading, just like read stuff on Twitter, read stuff in food outlets. Like, there's been so many times where I've come across an article or come across something of interest to me personally that I flagged to someone on my team that results in like either new business with a client, or just like we flagged to our client and they're like, oh, I didn't know about that. Like, super helpful, super interesting. So just, and it's cool because I love just, scanning news outlets and Twitter a lot for my own personal pleasure, but a lot of the time it comes into the fold for work, which is fantastic. So I would just encourage people to really dig into topics of interest, because it will likely come into play for your job. And in particular, at my role, it definitely has come to be super helpful over the past couple of years.
Fantastic. So we just have a minute or two left here. Anything else that you all would like to mention, highlight? Any parting advice here?
I would add a piece of parting advice that I think the easiest way to say it is just like, start where you are. Like, if you can just get a role that seems like a reasonably good fit, that you feel you can reasonably get along with your manager, and it's reasonably within the field you envision being in, perhaps that's a good starting point. Like, the idea that kind of that first or second job is going to just be such a slam dunk, I think is a 1 in 100 chance probably. But I know, speaking for myself, the longest role I've ever been in, I was in 5 years. So I don't advocate moving around every single year, but there is something to be said for just starting somewhere and knowing it's not forever. Like, you have, full ability to make your decision of when you may want to move on. And I think with COVID happening, it is a bizarre time. We all know that. But the number of companies I'm seeing develop way more flexible staffing systems, hiring people that live across the country with no request for them to move to the headquarters in whatever city, like, it's a lot. I'm seeing major changes in a lot of companies and how they're operating. And hopefully some of the newer grads will be able to maybe, find some advantages in that over these next couple of years.
Yeah. So we do have one question I'll throw out, and we'll try to squeeze as much as we can in the next minute here. But what do you each see as the most interesting developing trends or ideas in food and nutrition, areas of important innovation? Anything jump out to you?
Pairing sustainability and well-being, as in nutritional well-being, in the same breath, trying to be packaged as one set of benefits to farmers. Sorry, to consumers, but also hopefully to farmers. That connectivity is important.
The trend I get most asked about by far and away is plant-based. And that is a massive swirl of a whole lot of things going on. It could mean meat alternative, it could mean dairy alternative, or it could mean like eat more vegetables. plant-based is, I don't even know if I've comfortably labeled a trend anymore. It's more kind of the table stakes we're on. Now, what is that going to look like?
This isn't a trend, but I think there's in the food industry a lot of emphasis on traceability. I'm always asked about blockchain, so there's a lot of innovation happening, and there's been a lot of regulation that's changed in the last 5 years on food safety as well. That is shifting the way traceability works. So traceability is huge in food business and in the food space right now.
I would add climate labeling or eco-labeling of food products. I've seen more and more countries, especially in Europe, that are taking a stab at trying to add this to front of pack labeling. So it'll kind of be interesting to keep an eye on that in the coming years.
It's so fascinating. There's a lot of opportunity in the food business and innovation space. I want to thank all of you for participating in our panel today. It was really a rich conversation, and you're all doing such fascinating and impactful work. I greatly appreciate your time here. And with that, we are at the top of the hour, so I'm going to close us out and just say a huge thank you to all of the audience and to our panelists. Elena, do you have any closing comments?
Sure. Thank you so much to all of our panelists. This was a great panel.